Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Reserve Team podcast, your home of everything Australian and New Zealand football. My name is Branson Gibson. I am your host for episode 21 of the Reserve Team podcast. We have a very special W League episode coming up this week. We will be recapping what was a thrilling, captivating, amazing season in the W League and discussing all the big talking points. With me today is back again this week is Sean Matheson. How are you, mate?
I'm good, mate. I missed you last week, not getting to vent my usual frustrations with the world of football and whatever else, but I'm not sure I would have offered too much. The fantastic conversation you guys had about the NPLW in New South Wales anyway, but excellent to be back and thrilled to be talking through what has been a fantastic W League season.
Yeah, definitely. I'm excited to have you back as well, mate. You were away last week, which meant I had to do the recording and I didn't quite get the audio right. So my apologies to everyone out there for the mixed up or the mashed up audio. I think after everything, I had my input microphone is built. I don't know. It was just it was a bit of a shambles, mate. But you're here to push all the right buttons, and I am excited for that, mate.
Yeah, it wouldn't be a reserve team podcast if we didn't make some sort of technical difficulty issue throughout the course of the evening. So really, you just stayed consistent with everything else we've ever done.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we're going to do, mate, we're going to jump right into it. We're going to talk about the W League. The season's over now. We had the grand final, the Melbourne Victory coming out 1-0 winners over Sydney FC in dramatic, spectacular fashion. So we are going to recap pretty much everything, mate. So we'll start off with the grand final. What do you make of the game?
Look, it was a fascinating final series, and I think the biggest thing is that we make such a big deal out of the A-League final series about playoffs around world football and whatever else, and effectively between the last game of the season between Melbourne Victory and Sydney FC to the grand final was like a 7-day period, so they didn't even really get the luxury to kind of enjoy and bask in their big wins and big results. It was quick, free-flowing football and quick games coming for each and every team. So some of those players will now go over to North America and play in the NAWSL season. Some will go back and play for their local MPL competitions in and around their particular state. So for that, the season did kind of need to come to an end, but really it felt like a manic finish to what was a pretty manic season once you take into account different lockdown restrictions, all that sort of stuff. The crazy portion for that run home is about 3 weeks before the end of the season, there was still a scenario where Melbourne Victory may not have made finals, and somehow, by way of winning all of their games in hand and their direct matchups, they went into that last game of the season against Sydney FC, potentially having been able to jump up and finish on top of the ladder and win the Premier's Plate. Whatever the Premier's Plate equivalent is. Apologies if I've gotten that wrong. Let me know in the comment section below. Against Sydney FC. So for them, just a Herculean effort, I think, over the last 4 weeks of the season to get themselves through those big games, put themselves in that position to win that first piece of silverware and then carry on to that grand final where they did, to be fair, and it pains me as a City fan to say it, they were the better side, I thought, over the course of both the 90 minutes and the 120 minutes and thoroughly deserved their win. But yeah, a fantastic season for everybody. I think this has probably been the most adverse season that the W League has had to go through, and each of the clubs, each of the teams, all the coaching staff, all the players really handled themselves with aplomb and gave us, on the field at least, one of the most exciting seasons that I think we've had in recent years.
Yeah, I totally agree. I want to echo a lot of that. I mean, the W League in particular seemed to face a whole bunch of obstacles. So the fact that they were able to get through the season, I think that's still a huge achievement. I think that's sort of, it doesn't fly under the radar, but I don't know if they get enough credit for that. I just want to talk about the Victory because they just had a remarkable season across the board. I mean, you touched on some of them there. They had, the highs of a 6-0 Derby win, the lows of getting pumped 6-0 by Brisbane. Then at one stage, it looked like they were going to miss the finals altogether. Then they had a chance to finish on top of the league on the last day. Then they beat Brisbane 6-2, the side that they lost 6-0 to before. And then they beat Sydney with a 120th minute Olympico. That's ridiculous. What a season.
Yeah, I guess it just serves to kind of give value to that old cliche that you don't need to hit top form until the last part of the season. Comparatively, if you look at the way that Brisbane started, where Brisbane were undefeated for the first 6-7 games of the year, and Sydney FC were just consistently winning all their games in the New South Wales hub when we were still in the hub model at the start of the season. Victory weren't playing that well. But in reality, they really clicked into top gear and found their form and found consistency in their lineup in the last kind of 6-7 weeks of the season, and it shows in those ending results. Like, yes, they had some heavy defeats in kind of that middle third of the season, but really, like, their run home was absolutely impeccable, and they were fantastic for it. Jeff Hopkins as well, like, deserves a ton of credit. I've been a big rat for Vicky Linton throughout the course of the season for the work that she did with Canberra, but I think once you then have the ability to look back over the course of an entire season, Jeff Hopkins and the work that he's done at Victory. He's won multiple things at multiple different clubs. He's won awards at Melbourne Victory before. He's won stuff at Queensland before. He has done an excellent job, and I think he's probably got a group that he's now looking to build towards for the next 5 years probably. A lot of those young players, I think their backline's mostly under the age of 24, 25. Gabby Garton's the older head in the goal, but like a goalkeeper could go much longer. That back four, I think the oldest one is Angie Beard at 23. Morrison, Bunge, those other players, Polly Doran's only 19. Like, he's got a whole bunch of quality in that squad that realistically he could be working with for the next 2, 3, 4 years. The only challenge will be as those players continue to grow and develop and get into his structure and get familiar with his setting, do international teams come calling. We'll talk about it more as we go through because her name's going to come up quite a bit, but Kira Cooney-Cross was magnificent throughout the season, was magnificent again, arguably the best player on the park in the grand final win itself. Surely a player like that should be heading to Europe pretty soon. She'll probably go to North America, but honestly, I think she could be playing at a European level based on some of the other Matildas that we have over there at the moment. So yeah, really exciting. And at the same time, Sydney FC were also excellent. Jada Wyman, much has been made during the course of the week about her performance. She really kind of dragged Sydney through the 90 minutes, some immense saves during that regulation period, and she's just unfortunate. Like, the 120th minute, probably one of the last set pieces of the game, the corner came in, she got crowded out of it, could only get a single hand on it, and it crossed the line. So a phenomenal performance for her. Again, she's a player who's, I think, 22, so has a whole bunch of football ahead of her. A great young core of Sydney FC as well, where Remy Simpson's 21. Princess Abini, Bernie Abini's sister, is also relatively young. Courtney Vine had a great season that was cruelly cut down by injury. Claire Wheeler's magnificent and only 23. They've got players all through their backline as well, like Ali Green, that are just going to be, I think, Sydney FC stalwarts for the next 3, 4, 5 seasons unless they get moves internationally. So for both clubs, they should be incredibly excited and I think incredibly proud about the way they've gone about their season. And definitely, as far as looking forward for the W League, both of those teams, if they keep them together, they're definitely going to be forces to be reckoned with now and into the future as well.
Totally agree, mate. So we've covered off those two teams, Victory and Sydney, fairly well there. But what we're going to do now is sort of recap every team. We're going to take a quick look at the ladder. We'll run through it from the bottom up, and then we'll have just a quick chat about each team and how and what we thought of their season overall. The first team, of course, who finished 9th, Perth Glory, 12 games played, not a single win, unfortunately. For Perth, they had 1 draw, 11 defeats. What did you make of the season for Perth, Sean?
Look, it's a tough one. It's tough to be critical of them because they went into the season undermanned. When you and I did our season previews and went through kind of like what we expected for the W League season, I don't think anyone expected Perth to be that high up the table, but I don't think we quite expect them to be as low as they actually ended up being. And when you compare their pre-season, where they did have a coach announced well in advance with good WNPL experience in New South Wales, a lot of local talent playing in the State League and NPL competitions in Western Australia. You thought maybe they weren't going to have the same issues gelling as perhaps some of the other teams were that were in lockdown that didn't get to have full pre-seasons that made late signings. But in reality, like, it didn't quite work out on and off the field for them. Just the single point is one of the worst seasons in W League history. It sucks to say that, but that's the reality of the situation. They didn't get a win. I don't think they looked like getting a win in any of their games. Their 0-0 draw was with the Victory, funnily enough, who won the grand final early on in the season. But other than that, I don't think there were many matches where they realistically would look at and say, like, we got robbed or we potentially could have gotten 3 points out of that game if things had gone a little bit differently. Where I will give them credit is that they are committed to that coaching structure, and that coach has now signed on for a few extra years. They did announce like 4 or 5 player re-signings for players that will play in the West Australian State Leagues this upcoming season. So they are trying to get the core of that squad together as early as possible to continue building and continue growing. And they have got some relatively exciting teenage players that we've seen come throughout the course of this season. So the only way is up. And hopefully they're starting to put those pieces together so that they can actually make a bit of a jump up the table and get some victories next season.
Yeah, I totally agree. I suppose, yeah, you're right. The only way is up, or I mean, neutral. They could just plateau and stay at the bottom. But anyway, I totally agree about the player re-signings as well. So Alex Apakis, who's the head coach, he's re-signed. Hannah Lowry, Natasha Rigby, and Tegan McKenna, I believe, were three of the player re-signings that Perth announced there. So full credit to them for sort of locking that in early, and hopefully that has them in good stead heading into next season. The team who finished 8th, the Newcastle Jets, they had 2 wins, 1 draw, and 9 losses. Again, mate, you mentioned our season preview. We were a little bit not down, but we weren't expecting too much from the Jets. They did finish second last. What did you make of them? Because in particularly early on in the season, while they weren't getting the results, they did seem to have some positive performances.
So if you remember back when we did our season preview, like 12 weeks ago, they actually announced all their signings while we were recording it. Yeah. I don't know if you remember that. Like Twitter started buzzing and telling us all the players they brought in. And they did bring in some players that have been around that Newcastle Jets squad for a few seasons that, had good NPL experience, that had W League experience. And they did have little spells where it looked like they might cause some teams some issues. But retroactively, like at the end of the season, once you've got that full year to look back on, only 2 wins and one draw during that period. 9 defeats, like that does actually kind of look in line with what I think we were expecting at the start of the season. Where I'll give them credit is that they went out and had a crack every week. I don't think there was a singular week where they decided they were going to shut up shop and get, 10 players across the 18-yard box. Each week they really did go out and try and play a bit of football and try and play a progressive style and try and get forward as much as possible. Sometimes that was their undoing, but credit to them. Like I think they finished with a -7 goal difference. There are teams higher in the division that finished with worse goal differences, who we'll get to in a moment. So get credit for Newcastle when you are that under-resourced and you're that late in pre-season making and announcing these signings. It's tough. Like you're not really going to be able to compete with some of the more professional outfits in the division, but hopefully because they have gone out there and are starting to build their own style and are starting to have an attempt at a win, they're laying that groundwork and foundation to hopefully build upon that next season. And fingers, toes, arms, eyes, ears crossed for the A-League and W-League. If the Newcastle situation can be resolved as far as their ownership is concerned, they can get that consistent funding. They will continue to build and grow that program.
Yeah, totally agree. I think one of the big results here, 2 big results for the Jets. At one stage, they did draw with Brisbane, so they were able to take points off what was one of the top teams in the league as well. And then we saw towards the end of the year as well, they beat Perth Glory 4-0. So I think that sort of showed that they are a step above Perth, but then at the same time, the fact that they finished 8th shows that there still is a heck of a lot of room for them to grow and a heck of a lot of work that still needs to be done for them to be competitive. Moving on to the next team, Melbourne City. This is where I eat humble pie, I think, mate. I think in my W League preview, I had my City coloured glasses and I was like, yep, they've lost a bunch of players. Doesn't matter. They're still going to have a really good season. And it did not quite turn out that way. 12 games played. They had 4 wins, 1 draw and 7 defeats. The good thing for Melbourne City that sort of changed the outlook of the year, they were able to finish with 3 straight wins to end the season, which sort of, paints the season in a little bit of a different light, sort of shows that maybe if they'd hit their stride a little earlier, it could have been different. But what did you make of it for Melbourne City? Because based purely on the numbers, it was their worst ever W League season.
Yeah, and like we always try and be positive just based on the people that we are in these sort of things. But like this is a Melbourne City team who I think underwhelmed on the pitch, and I think really their coaching structure got found out quite a bit. Like I've been critical of Rado Vizic for a while, and at no point do I think anything he's done for that season has like kind of proved me wrong or made me like less thinking along those lines that perhaps they need a higher like level coach. They've had some hugely high standards set with the likes of Joe Montemuro, who could end up coaching in the A-League again next season based on him leaving Arsenal Women. They've also had like Paddy Kisnorbo, who's made a very quick transition to men's senior management in the A-League itself as well. And then Rado last season had arguably one of the best squads ever assembled at a W League level. All he really had to do was get those players out there, like your Catleys, your Williams, your Carpenters, whoever else. Like they are going to win you games based on their own individual quality. Where I think this is the most frustrating for City is that their squad still wasn't that terrible. There were gaps in it. I think they had gaps in midfield. I think they had gaps up top as well in particular. But they had quality wingers. They had good experience in the division. They had an excellent defence as well. Like Tegan Micah still had one of the best seasons, I think, of anyone in the competition. They still had Samantha Johnson. They still had Jenna McCormick. They still had Emma Checker. These are players that are still in the discussions for Matilda's caps at the moment. So they shouldn't have conceded 23 goals, which is the second worst in the division. They shouldn't have conceded 6 goals in a game to Melbourne Victory. So there's obviously stuff going on in terms of their structure and their coaching and the way that they're actually setting themselves up that were incredibly wrong this season. Comparative to the likes of Western Sydney, Adelaide, Canberra, who are above them, I think they still do have a better quality squad. And in reality, this is a failure both of the individual playing group to actually kind of like get the best out of each other, and then also I think of the coaches to get the most out of the group that they've put together. So it'll be a fascinating off-season. We will see if Vidicic continues in that role. If he does, huge questions are going to be asked. I have a feeling that if they don't come flying out next season and win their first few games, people are going to start asking a lot of questions about what's happening at the Melbourne City W League side of it and what they aspire to be. If they're going to be a team that brings through youngsters, they need to be signing more like 18, 19, 20-year-old talent and playing them every week. Or if they're going to continue to try and fill in with these different Matildas type fringe players like Chidiac, McCormack, whoever else, then they really need to like kind of double down on that and start trying to put together effectively a super team comparative to the likes of Sydney FC, Brisbane Roar, Melbourne Victory that we've seen this season.
Definitely. And, it was always going to be a tough ask for Melbourne City losing so many players. I think they in particularly were hard hit by the fact that because the season was so short and because a lot of their signings came just before the season started, a lot of their bigger signings anyway, it took them a while to get everyone in that squad. By the time that happened, the season was practically over for them. But it will be very, very interesting to see how they come out next year and if they're able to rebound at all. Moving on up, the team that finished sixth was the Western Sydney Wanderers. 4 wins, 1 draw, 7 defeats. Same number of points as Melbourne City, but they had a superior goal difference as well. What did you make of Melbourne City? Western Sydney, Sean. When you look at some of their results, I don't think they had a single win against a team above them on the table.
No, and they did finish the season, I think, with like a defeat, a win, a defeat, a win, a defeat, which really I thought summed up the way that they played and the way that they set themselves up. They'd have a good week where like they'd have good application, good intensity, and they'd keep that going throughout the course of it. Even in defeats, they'd like manage those battles relatively well. Early season, I think they got beaten 3-0 by Sydney FC and then played them again 2 weeks after because of the hub model, and they improved quite a bit. It was like a 2-1 defeat. So they were definitely learning lessons as they went. They do have some talented young players in there as well. Copus Brown was excellent throughout the course of the season. They've got a few youngsters that are continuing to come through that academy structure as well over in Western Sydney. So the same way their A-League side is like starting to work towards developing young talent through that new academy that they've got built and through their training infrastructure and all that sort of stuff, they are trying to do the same thing at the in the W League squad as well, where they're bringing through young talent that's been involved either at a junior level or a WNPL level for 2 or 3 seasons, which is great to see. That's what you want to see more clubs building towards, those academy styles. However, they do tend to, I think, create like big vacuums of depth across their squad, where if they do lose individual players from certain positions on the pitch, they look a bit lost and they don't necessarily have that thing to fall back on. Lena Camus at 34 is like leading the line for them still, and she's a great player, but like has a long injury history. And when she's not in the side, they're a completely different outfit because they don't seem to have that natural leader or that natural focal point to really relieve pressure by keeping possession or but just being able to hold up the ball and bring other people into play. So I think they want to work on their overall depth and being able to bring players off the bench that can change a game. And then also having different options for different opposition, I think will be the big jump that they look to make this season. But sixth position, I think they would have looked at as being an improvement on the previous year. I think they're going to look now to go to that next level and start competing with the likes of Canberra, Adelaide and whoever else for those kind of final series spots. So yeah, a step in the right direction, but certainly you'd hope they take that step again next season.
Yeah, definitely. And when we look at the table on a whole, Western Sydney finished on 13 points. There was a big gap between them and the team above them in Adelaide. Adelaide United finished in 5th, 7 wins, 1 draw and 4 defeats. They were on 22 points, so a 9-point gap between 5th and 6th. Adelaide United, was this a successful season for them? I mean, they've never made the W League finals before. They came super, super close. I think Canberra had a couple of games in hand, and Adelaide just had to watch and hope that some of those results for the victory went their way for them to scrape into the finals. Unfortunately, they didn't. They missed out on goal difference by a solitary goal. What did you make of the season for Adelaide United? And were they the hard luck team this year?
Yeah, 100%. And I don't think I'm the only person that's kind of called that out this season. So we'll talk about this further, later on in the podcast about mid-season departures. But the squad that finished Brisbane Roar's season would not have finished above Adelaide United's squad, with some of the players that they lost throughout the course of the year. Adelaide, when they were going well, their forward play was arguably the best in the division. I thought Rojas was excellent again. I thought little bit part players like Fiona Wirtz were excellent. Dylan Holmes got a big move across to Europe towards the end of the season. They've got quite a few other young players that are looking to really kind of grow their games. Charlotte Grant, I think it is. I always get her confused with Charlotte McGrath, but also another player that's probably now being talked about as a fringe Socceroo potentially down the track. So they've got a lot of young pieces there that are, again, South Australian locals that they're building towards. They've got a very comfortable structure, and they really went out and had a crack this season, and I thought going forward were excellent. In the end, it was goal difference that did them in with Canberra United, and in reality, I think that just came from potentially at the back, they just need one mature leader, someone who's been around the league for a good few seasons who can really kind of lead that back line more effectively, because a lot of the bit part players around them are 20, 21, 22. Where you'd stand up would be things like set piece scenarios or whatever else. They scored 22 goals, which is amongst the best in the division, but they also conceded 18 during that time, which is not worthy of really getting into those top four scenarios. And those are the tiny things that kind of divide whether you finish in fourth spot or finish in fifth. And I think in reality, that's the one piece that perhaps they're missing, that little bit of experience to lead their back line. But they had an excellent year. I think they look back at it as being relatively successful. And I think they'll look back and think, okay, the future does look pretty exciting. Can Rojas do it again next season at 34? We will see. But definitely, if you look at the form this season, one of the better players and one of the most exciting players in the competition.
Definitely. And very quickly, on the 18 goals that you mentioned they conceded, that was more than more than the four teams above them. So the most in the top five. So that just sort of shows where they need to work on, as you said. One of the teams that was above them, directly above them, in fact, was Canberra United in fourth place. 6 wins, 4 draws, and 2 losses for Canberra. They did make the finals. Michelle Heyman was spectacular. What did you make of Canberra United's season, mate?
Yeah, excellent. I've been a big rap for Vicky Linton for a while, because I think they play a very exciting and expansive brand of football. I think for certain teams, when you've got the luxury of having Matilda talent, even ex-Matilda talent, you just give them the ball and kind of hope that they'll figure it out from there. But Canberra, they're great to watch in terms of the way that their overall team shape moves. They get really small out of possession, they close down space really well, and then their transition to then making the pitch huge is very, very quick. And with players like Paige Satchel, Grace Maher, whoever else, they've got a lot of pace and mobility where they can get in behind quite quickly. It opens up space for Michelle Heyman to kind of do her thing, and she was excellent again this season. And they've got, I think, a group that they're going to try and keep together now for a good couple of seasons, hopefully build on for the back. They've got some evergreen players, Kendall Fletcher at the back, a couple of their US imports as well. They potentially won't necessarily be returning to Canberra in the next couple of seasons, which could leave some holes that they'll be looking to recruit from. But I think a top 4 finish they would have taken at the start of the season. Now the interesting portion will be, given that they are a small market, given how impressive some of their young players have been. Grace Maher had an ill-fated move to Melbourne Victory previously, and she's returned back to Canberra, her hometown club. Nikki Flannery stayed at Canberra all the way through. They are quite close and good friends. If they're starting to build a core around players like that, then yeah, the future's really exciting for Canberra. I think the challenge that they had at the start of the season was opening 10 rounds of the competition. I think they lost to both Sydney FC and Brisbane in big games that could have potentially seen them go into the top spot or stay top 2, and they kind of wilted a little bit. They did finish the season strong. They had a draw with Sydney in the run home. They did win, I think, 3 of their last 5 as well. So it looked like they did make that progression. Now they need to really kind of make that jump to being, okay, we're going to be a perennial title favourite, and we're going to go out and win more of those head-to-head games against the other best sides in the league, because that's really the missing piece for them. They couldn't really win the big matches, and I think kind of the way that they got steamrolled a little bit in the semi-final, that kind of showed the difference in maturity between that playing group and the Sydney FC group, who we'll talk through a little bit further in a moment.
Definitely. And one quick thing for Canberra, I'm pretty sure they were the only team this season who didn't lose to Brisbane. They drew with Brisbane and they beat Brisbane. I think every other team at some point lost to the Brisbane superpower. So credit to Canberra for that, I guess, But we saw they struggled against Perth. I think they drew with them and then they just got over the line 3-2 when Perth were down a player as well. So room for improvement for Canberra. But I hope to see them do very well. They're one of my favourite teams. I have a big soft spot for them. The team who finished there, we'd already talked about the Melbourne Victory. We'll go back over them again. 7 wins, 2 draws, 3 losses. They finished on 23 points. In the end, 5 points behind Sydney. That is a little bit misleading, though, because as we mentioned before, they played Sydney on the last day of the season. Had they won that, they would have finished top. Mate, recap again for me. What do you think of the Victory season?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. Third place doesn't necessarily tell the story of their season, which is that they were in the running for the Premier's Plate right up until the very kind of last couple of kicks of the game. I do think it's a very topsy-turvy season for them, and it'll be interesting to see the way that I mentioned, if they keep that group together, they've built that dynasty. It'll be very interesting to see, I think, how they weave together this season than the NPL season, where a lot of those players go to different clubs where they're not necessarily playing together, and then bringing that same kind of group back in for the next preseason and W League season. If they can manage that portion with little gaps in between, or little knowledge gaps, or little player changes, I think they'll be in good shape, because the way that they finished the year was obviously much stronger than the way that they kind of had a good start, but then a lull in the middle. And they were one of the teams, if you remember back, that took forever to actually get their season started because of cancelled fixtures and restructured games and lockdown restrictions and all that sort of stuff in different states. So they did have huge highs in the 6-0 victory over Melbourne City. They had, I think, terrible defeats where they lost 3-2 to them, the week after, again, kind of showing the rollercoaster of form that they went through. They got absolutely pummeled by Brisbane. And then at the same time, they had some very dominant performances against the likes of Perth. I didn't think after they lost to Sydney FC in the last week of the season, they'd be able to play them a week later and beat them, or that they'd be able to play them a week after and really, I thought, dominate the key chances effectively. But they did. So clearly, you've got to give a ton of credit to their coaching staff for being able to look at that first match, analyse what worked well for them, analyse what they needed to change and do differently, and really get on top of Sydney FC in the eventual grand final in that high-pressure situation. So that's really the difference, and it's a good comparison with Canberra, where the big games that they played in, they never really got over the line, whereas it felt like every big game Melbourne Victory was confronted with, they met that challenge. And they may not have won all the games, but they at least gave a good account of themselves. And really, I think that showed through in the grand final. It takes quite a bit of effort to get to the 120th minute and find a last-minute winner. So, yeah, credit to them. It's been a great season.
Yeah, and again, I just want to echo the topsy-turvy nature of it. I know you said it there, but, to beat Melbourne City 6-0, that seemed like a crazy result. As you said, the next week they lost 3-2 to Melbourne City, then got pumped 6-0 by the Raw. They beat Perth Glories 6-0, as you said. Talking about the Sydney game, the title decider, I thought, while it was 2-1, the Victory scored late. I thought Sydney didn't dominate the game, but I thought they definitely looked the better of the two sides. I thought the Victory looked maybe a level below, so in 20th minute. But for them to be able to flip the script and turn it around and be the better of the two sides, I thought was fantastic. And in the end, for the Victory, an incredible season for so many reasons. The team above them also had an incredible season. Brisbane Roar. 7 wins, 4 draws, 1 solitary defeat for Brisbane. What did you make of their season? Because, looking back at the start, they were slow starters. They had all this firepower. I think they drew their first 4 games. They didn't score until their 4th game or something like that as well. Then it seemed they were firing on all cylinders, but then almost sort of faltered towards the end. What did you make of Brisbane's year, mate?
I think they'll be disappointed. I think if you look at the strength of the squad that they had on paper, potentially they would have thought that, they would be the team to beat as far as the title is concerned. They managed to keep most of their Matildas talent with that big 4 of Polkinghorne, Gorey, Gielnik and Yallop. But it didn't quite work out that way for them. And arguably, and I've said this, and I'm not a football expert, I'm not an A-level coach or anything like that, but I thought they actually looked better once they took Katrina Gorey out of that side, where they were a bit reliant on giving her the ball and expecting her to create something magnificent. But once they took her away, it was like everyone kind of then started to get in that hive mind of, okay, we don't have that outlet anymore, so we've got to move the ball a bit quicker. They've got wonderful supporting cast as well. Isabel Dalton we'll talk about a little bit further with some of the individual stuff, but they've also got like good young players like coming through. Mario Hesch has been around the club and around the W League for a good few seasons and has developed into quite a talent. So they've got a good depth, and I think they arguably would have said that they probably have competitive depth, if not better depth, than Melbourne Victory and Sydney FC. But they've really become, I think, the team that dropped away in the top, like the title race, and then again just kind of like faltered and not rolled over. That's probably a bit harsh on their overall season, but really like they went out with kind of a whimper in the final series. You would have thought you'd get more fight and more battle to eventually go down by a multiple goal margin in that setting. I would question, and we'll talk about this further again, I don't think Brisbane Roar side without Claire Polkinghorne, without Katrina Gorry, without Emily Gielnik, and Yallop is the one that stayed but could potentially still move on as well, I don't think that team would have made the top four. So it's one of those interesting things in the W League because of there's no transfer window. You can have mid-season player departures for whatever reasons. Gory's is a different circumstance, but I don't think they would have finished top four. So the reality is you look back on, they had one squad for the first 10 games of the season and then a different squad for the last kind of 3, including finals. And that last 3 weeks wasn't necessarily that exciting or that interesting, I felt anyway. So huge off-season for them. We'll see how they recruit. We'll see if they look to local talent. We'll see if they look to bring Matildas back home. We know that they are happy to do that based on their recruitment policies for previous seasons. But I think a huge off-season for Brisbane Roar. They've got a lot of questions that they need to answer, and arguably for any of the teams in the division, the most holes that they potentially need to fill in based on those big player departures.
Definitely. I think Brisbane will be the most disappointed. Oh, actually, as soon as I said that, I regretted saying I was going to say they'd be the most disappointed, but then I was like, actually, maybe not.
I think they'd be the most disappointed of the top 4 sides. Maybe not definitely. The whole league, but yeah, the top 4 definitely.
Well, just the fact that they weren't able to come away with silverware with what was such a loaded squad. I mean, they won 7 of their last 8 games in the regular season, then went out in dramatic fashion to the victory. But if you look back to their early start, their 4 draws, that's what cost them. They had a draw with Melbourne City in the opening round and then a draw with the Newcastle Jets in round 4. So that's 2 draws against teams that finished 8th and 7th on the table. If they pick up wins in those, the extra 4 points, they finish top. So I think when you look back, I mean, hindsight is obviously 2020, but you look at those results and you go, yep, that's what hurt them. And then, yep, we'll get into it later. What might have hamstrung. There we go. I don't know what hamstrung is. What might have hamstrung Brisbane in the finals. But let's talk about Sydney, the champions. They did finish on top, 9 wins, 1 draw, 2 losses. What'd you make of Sydney? They were the hot team in the bubble early when they were taking on just the New South Wales Conference. They seemed to look a little bit more vulnerable once they had to play Brisbane and some of the other sides. But in the end, it was a very, very, very good season for Sydney.
Yeah, it was. Premiers, not champions, before people start firing off at us in the comment section below. We know Australia's weird. But the interesting portion for me is they finished with 9 wins, which is 2 wins clear of any of the teams near them. What eventually killed them is that Brisbane just didn't lose games. As much as we just spoke about Brisbane's poor season, they only lost once, albeit some underwhelming defeats and underwhelming wins during that period. For Sydney FC, I think they did well making that adjustment. The difficulty with that hub model is that you can only play the teams that are put in front of you. You can't really punish them or criticise them for only beating Western Sydney twice or only beating Newcastle twice or whatever the results happen to be. And they did, I thought, relatively well throughout the season in those head-to-head matchups. I think what eventually kind of started to count against them quite a bit is they had a very settled lineup, Polias anchoring midfield, Wheeler and Lowy in there alongside, and that front 3 of Seamson, Vine and Abini was key and critical to what they did. Courtney Vine going down injured at arguably the worst time of the season, that last run home. I don't think it stopped many of the other players from playing, but I think it showed her importance in terms of additional runs to stretch defence to get Seamson more time on the ball or to get Seamson one-on-one with certain defenders. The ability of Abini to go inside and outside was kind of taken away. She had to keep outside to retain that width because Wheeler was kind of trying to do the overlap on the right to make runs that effectively I think Courtney Vine would have made on her own. So I think they'll look back kind of regretting that one, they lost that player at a key and critical time in the run home when other sides were continuing to get their best 11 out there on the park. And then I think for Ante Juric, who looks to be a very competent manager and will have probably a very successful MPLW season, he'll probably be looking at it to say, how do I get that extra depth? How do I find a player that if one of my front three goes down, that we can immediately slot a fourth player in and not really lose too much of that cohesion, not really lose as much of that overall value and that overall attacking depth that we have. Still excellent from them. Like only one draw throughout the course of the year, only 2 defeats. And I think even those defeats were hard fought. Nobody really beat Sydney outright throughout the course of the year. And they do have a relatively young squad. I don't know if they're going to be able to keep a lot of those young players. I'd say Remy Simpson's probably top of a lot of people's lists to make the jump to Europe or make the jump to North America. Players like Ali Green, players like Princess Abini, players like Claire Wheeler, they are exceptional talents that have their best footballing years ahead of it. So the big challenge for them will just be trying to keep that group together. But I could definitely see a huge chip on a few shoulders down at Sydney FC that they want to go and push on next season and really get themselves that double and start to become what Melbourne City has been for the last 4 or 5 years, which is like a proper W League dynasty.
Yeah, definitely. And just quickly on Sydney FC, I think they showed huge resolve and huge steel to hang on and actually beat the victory in that last game of the season. Heading into that, they'd lost to Adelaide United 2-0 2 weeks prior. Then they drew 0-0 with Canberra. So, they weren't exactly heading into that title deciding game on the best of form. Had they lost, they wouldn't have finished on top. They would have finished third. So I think it showed a lot of resolve for them to go out and actually get that result. And it was just a weird one how Sydney finished on top because, everyone just sort of looked at Brisbane as the dominant team. So Sydney, I don't know, it was sort of weird where even though they finished on top, there was always these sort of question of, are they actually the best team in the league? But full credit to them. They got the job done. They were our premiers, not our champions. Thanks for correcting me on that one before as well, Sean. Does my head in being, Victorian AFL, you win the grand final, you're the premiers. It always muddles me up. Always, always, always. But thank you for calling me out there. But, mate, that recaps the W League season. It was a fantastic season. Let's take a look now, though, at some of the individual awards. What we're going to start off with, I hope, is the Golden Boot winner. Yeah, cool. Sorry, man. I was just thinking.
You nailed it. You absolutely nailed it.
I just wasn't sure what order the slides were in, but we've nailed it. Yeah, so the Golden Boot winner this season was Emily Gelnick from the Brisbane Roar. She scored 13 goals, a deserved winner, Sean. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I have been critical on Twitter of Emily Gelnick in the past, so I've got to give her a bit of praise now. I do think at an international level, she's a bit of a flat track bully and you can't play her against the big sides, but as far as this W League season is concerned, she was excellent. She did a bit of everything. Set pieces, penalties, finishes with the head, finishes with her feet, gets tremendous athlete, powerful, strong runner, very, very quick, I think deceptively quick as far as comparisons with the other divisions go. I think the biggest credit is that she's one of the players that's made the jump to Europe, clearly showing that she is at a point in her career, getting to 27, 28 years of age now, where, they want to really be playing at that top level and getting those challenges in. So she makes a jump across to Scandinavia, where she will likely play quite a bit and hopefully continues to grow and build on her career. And I think one of those players that's really looking at 2023 with, a firm grasp on a position in that squad and looking to build upon it for the next season. I do want to give a shout out as well, honourable mention to second place in the Golden Boot, Michelle Heyman, who finished with 10 goals in Canberra United side that didn't score quite as freely as Brisbane Roar did, but at the same time also took the all-time leading scorer for the W League competition with 95 goals. I think she's on now, taking that title back from Sam Kerr and looking like, even at 32, 33 years of age, like she is going to continue into next season and the season after and whatever else, some quality finishes in there, really turning back the clock. So, yeah, congratulations to Emily Gelnick, a wonderful season, and congratulations to Michelle Heyman for getting her place in history.
Definitely. And one stat that I saw on Emily Gelnick as well that sort of leapt out to me was shots on target over the course of the season. She had the most with 38. She was 16. That was 16 shots on target more than Michelle Heyman, who was in second place on 22. So I don't know. That just sort of leapt out as me as a interesting stat as well. Moving on, though, the next award is goalkeeper of the year, and we've given that to the goalkeeper with the most clean sheets, and that was Gabriella Garton from the Melbourne Victory. Sean, what do you think of that, and any honourable mentions as well?
Fascinating. So this is a fascinating story. I'm not sure if you remember this one. Gabrielle Garton actually signed for Essendon Royals in State League 1 women's football, where she was brought across as part of a very aggressive investment that they've had in the local Victorian competitions. She is US born, but an Argentinian international, played at like Boca Juniors and a few clubs in North America as well. She came across to fulfill that role, and I think to also work on like a doctorate or a PhD or something crazy like that in the political science arena. So interesting as how she got to Australia, and then even more interesting that due to a couple of injuries, where I don't even think she would have been in Victory squad if not for their regular keeper going down before the season began. And she's gone on to really prove herself as being one of the better keepers in this division. A worthy winner, 7 goals, was excellent again in both the final game of the season when the Premier's plate was on the line, albeit in defeat, and then again in the grand final, was just incredibly solid and was part of a back five that I think is very, very impressive, the base on which Melbourne Victory built everything. There are honourable mentions to quite a few different keepers around the division. Jada Wyman was excellent, and I don't think gets enough credit because she was in a dominant Sydney FC side that didn't concede that many shots, let alone chances for her to like make saves and whatever else, and was fantastic in the final as well. A lot of people have praised her and arguably given her like the Player of the Match award. I'm not sure if she officially won Best Player on the Park for the grand final, but she would certainly be a worthy winner. And then also Tegan Micah, like acknowledging our City bias, like she was immense this season. We've spoken about City in our review, kind of talking about how many goals they conceded and how poor their coaching structure and the amount of chances they gave up. And even then, she still looked like one of the best players in the division. So would have been very interesting, I think, to see where City may have potentially ended up if they didn't have her there to kind of bail them out quite a few different times. But as far as the goalkeeping stocks are concerned in the W League, a lot of different players we were talking about potentially leaping up and becoming that leading goalkeeper with the departure of Lydia Williams and Mackenzie Arnold and a few of those big players that are now in Europe. And we've just shown how good the goalkeeping quality and depth is within Australia, that so many players have kind of stepped up immediately, and we can have a conversation about 3 or 4 different keepers in the division about being who is the best in the league and who would you want between the sticks for your particular team.
Definitely. It was a fantastic season for Garton. She was also second in the league in save percentage as well. The next award was leading assists, and that went to Isabel Dalton from Brisbane. She had 7 assists. Sean, what do you think of her season?
Yeah, excellent. Not one of the big four for Brisbane Roar, but definitely did really well pulling the strings, did really well as like a secondary focal point, particularly after Katrina Gorey left, and they needed someone to kind of step up and really like run that midfield for them so that they could keep Gielnik further up the park, they could keep Yallop further up the park and really get them doing what they do best, which is creating goal-scoring chances for everybody. I thought she was fantastic throughout the course of the year. Just model of consistency throughout the course of the season for Brisbane Roar. The fact that Brisbane, I think, are the only side that posted multiple 6-0 victories throughout the course of the season. I think Melbourne Victory had one. I mean, as soon as I said that, I started
Melbourne
to think
Victory had 2.
Yeah, they did, and I think that Brisbane did as well.
3. Oh, sorry, big pun. Sorry.
No, 2,
no,
3.
2. They beat Melbourne City 6-0. They beat Perth Glory 6-0, but then they beat Brisbane 6-2.
6-2. So we'll count it. We'll count it.
Yeah, we're good. Right, there we go. We got there, mate.
We did. We always do. And Brisbane had multiple games where they really tore some teams apart, and it was because of the likes of Isabel Dalton really pulling the strings and creating that high quality of service. I don't think Gielnik gets the leading scorer award without Isabel Dalton's season, and then by the same token, I don't think Isabel Dalton gets the leading assist maker for the year if she doesn't have the likes of Yallop and Gielnik finishing off the chances for her. But an excellent year, and definitely a player that I think we're going to look at next season as building and maybe going to that top upper echelon of players within the W League itself.
Definitely. And I mean, as you said, with the assist and the golden boot, it really does show that it is a team game, mate. You can't do it on your own. What we're going to do now, though, is take a very quick look at the PFA W League team of the season. The goalkeeper who was selected was Gabriella Garton. As we said, she had a fantastic season. The back 4, we had Angela Beard, Claire Polkinghorne, Kayla Morrison, and Jamila Rankin. Sean, any honourable mentions as well, or people who you thought who might have been a little bit unlucky not to sneak in there?
I thought Sydney FC's defence was very good throughout the course of the season, was perhaps a little bit underrated. They did. They were a bit disjointed at Sydney FC. They lost Ellie Brush earlier in the year, but I thought Natasha Pryor, and apologies if her name's not actually Natasha, but I think it is, was excellent coming into their season. I thought Ali Green was immense as well. I would have probably put Ali Green, I think, in that lineup ahead of Jamila Rankin if it was me picking it, but again, I'm not picking it. For me, and we'll talk about this with the overall squad, Sydney FC only having one representative, remembering that this team was released before the grand final, wasn't necessarily reflective, I think, of how much they brought to the league this season. But like the other three, you can't really argue against. Angie Beard was fantastic all throughout the year. Kayla Morrison, arguably the signing of the season across the division. She was excellent. And Claire Polkinghorne, like staple of the Matildas, will likely be a part of our centre-back pairing at the upcoming World Cup as well. So no real complaints there. Just honourable mention for Ali Green, I think.
Very nice. Looking at the midfield, we had three midfielders, Kyra Cooney-Cross, Teresa Polias, and Tamika Yallop. Any honourable mentions there, mate?
I think they got this one right. I look at this one and I say, okay, yeah, I probably would have picked that same team in that same selection, trying to get as many of those, those big three players kind of in there. Polias just continues to be like an evergreen player, all-time W League appearance maker. Kyra Cooney-Cross, I think, was excellent. She's going to be in people's conversations for both the Young Player of the Season and then potentially also for the Julie Dolan Award eventually at the end of the year. Such was her importance at a teenage age to Melbourne Victory structure. And like she gets credited as the goal scorer for that 120-minute goal, but really pulled the strings pretty much every victory game this season. She was absolutely fantastic and was instrumental in that 6-0 victory over Melbourne City as well. She was the difference maker, despite what you might read and hear elsewhere. Tamika Yallop, obviously one of the form players and premier players in the competition. Maybe I would have started Claire Wheeler ahead of her based on the strength of their seasons. I think even Yallop would look back at this year as being one where perhaps didn't hit the highs that she's capable of, but in reality that's mainly due to we know that she's capable of so much more, and we know that she is like an elite world-class level athlete still playing in the W League. So I think they'd probably look at it as being a disappointing season, but still, if you're judging it on a baseline of performance, definitely a worthy inclusion.
Definitely. And now the front three were Michelle Heyman, Emily Gelnick, and Lisa Devanna. Lisa Devanna is someone who we haven't mentioned yet. She had a fantastic season as well. What do you make of that front three, Sean?
I'm going to disagree with you. I actually didn't think Devanna had that great overall year. I thought Devanna had great individual performances in certain games, like the big victory against Melbourne City, like the kind of run home. But she also, I think she only played 8 of the 12 regular season games and then played in finals as well, which to me sees that maybe she went in on reputation rather than her value and contributions over the whole 12-game regular season. But that's just me.
I'll quickly chime in. I think she made an impact. I felt like she impacted a lot of games. So even if she wasn't necessarily, even if the stats aren't there, I mean, she's always ever present in any lineup, but I felt like she made an impact. Yeah.
I guess maybe another way of looking, I don't think she had a bad season. I'm not criticising and saying she didn't have an impact and that she's an important player. But look, if you look at this a different way, the names that are on this list would have been on a lot of people's teams of the season previews or guesses based on Devanna's one of the biggest names in the competition. Yallop's one of the biggest names in the competition. Gielnik, whoever else. Those are the big names and the stars that we already know of. So for me, that left wing spot, I think there were players that had better overall years. You could potentially push Yallop up there and bring a Grace Maher into midfield to reflect how good Canberra were for this season. I personally would put Cote Rojas in there, who was fantastic for Adelaide. Adelaide not represented anywhere in the entire squad, despite the fact that they finished their highest ever finish and got closest to finals they've ever got. I think Canberra is criminally underrepresented. Michelle Heyman's the only one there in the squad. Kendall Fletcher is on the bench, but I thought they had Nikki Flannery had a great season. Grace Maher had a great season. There were more parts to that. Paige Satchel, another one who had a fantastic season. So I don't know. I would have potentially moved that around a little bit. I think Devanna and Heyman drop out or drop to the bench, maybe not out of the overall squads. And I think you try and work in someone like Courtney Vine, who I thought was fantastic. If she had played the full season, would have 100% have started. And someone like Paige Satchel, Grace Maher, whoever else, work them back in there. Cote Rojas would be my pick, but yeah, that was my thought and heading. I understand 100% why Gielnik's in there, leading scorer for the division, played every game, fantastic. Heyman, again, a fantastic season. I'm being a real jerk about this, but there were wingers that I thought had excellent years, and none of them are represented because we're trying to get 3 forwards and Heyman, Kelnick, and Devanna into that team. I would have personally gone with Cote Rojas and someone like a Grace Marr somewhere else in the park. So that's just me, but happy to defer to the other people, and by all means, correct me in the comment section below, over on Twitter, wherever else, if you disagree.
Just very quickly on Lisa Devanna, I have pulled up her stats. She made 10 appearances this year, 8 starts, only 1 goal, only 1 assist, and 1 goal from a penalty as well, sorry.
Yeah.
So some underwhelming numbers there, but I do think she made an impact. Anyway, you mentioned some of those players.
Totally worthy of being in the squad. I'm not saying she shouldn't be in the squad. I just don't think she starts as far as my team is concerned.
Yep. That's fine. Totally agree. Well, I don't totally agree, but I value your opinion, mate. You mentioned some of those names, some of those honourable mentions, and some of the players on the bench. The players who were on the bench were Tegan Micah in goals, Kendall Fletcher, Claire Wheeler, Courtney Vine, and Melina Ayres. Overall, mate, the Victory dominated the team. They had 5 starters plus 1 on the bench. As you mentioned, only 1 representative in the starting 11 from Sydney. They did have 2 on the bench in Claire Wheeler and Courtney Vine. And Jeff Hopkins, the Melbourne Victory coach, was selected as the manager of the year. Do you agree with that?
No, because this was given out before the grand final. I would have given it to Ante Juric. So this actually came out, I think, just before the semi-finals or maybe even the day of. And I think at that point, like, it goes to the person who won the league, right?
I was going to say, so it came out before the grand final,
yeah,
and even then you still think that Hopkins doesn't deserve it.
No,
even though he actually won the grand final,
yeah,
couldn't have done anything other than what he did. And you go, well, it came out before the grand final, which he actually won, but nah.
Before the grand final, no, I don't think he did. But after the grand final, yes, I think he's a worthy winner. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So to sum up, you think they've made the right decision, but at the wrong point of time.
They got it right, but they got it right by messing it up, if that makes sense. But yeah, a worthy winner.
They got lucky.
I can't be critical of Jeff Hopkins. He's a very good coach. He knows what he's doing.
Yeah, definitely. And as you said, Ante Juric, I mean, they won the league. It's hard not to give it to that manager either. It's a difficult award to give out, but mate, that pretty much recaps the W League season as a whole that we were sort of talking about. Now we're going to take a quick break. We're going to jump into our Hall of Fame, and then we've got more W League discussion coming up after that. But mate, let's get into the Hall of Fame. So you weren't here last week. It was Will and I running the show, and we had our first ever unanimous inductee into the Hall of Fame. That was Riley Dobson for the proposal after the final W League game of the season. Will and I talked about it last week. What did you make of that moment?
Yeah, wonderful. Really like one of the highlights, not just for Melbourne City, but for the entire competition. At least we got to finish as City fans our year on a high note. We wish her and her fiancé Matt all the best with their upcoming nuptials, and of course his ongoing battle, which Riley has retired to support him on. But a fantastic story. Wish them all the best together, and hopefully the story has a fairy tale ending and everything works out correctly. The other one as well, because you guys didn't have the collage last week as well, I have to give you a shout out for kind of pulling one back on me in terms of getting the Mexican visa sign guy finally in there. He's part of the collage just alongside David Squires and Chrissy Trajeska there. So you're slowly chipping back at me. I guess even technically maybe if the proposal's your nomination, you are starting to reel me back in terms of the overall lead.
Yeah, we're going to have to... I was just having a quick look at the collage there. I mean, I don't want to keep score, but I think it is might be a little bit close here. I mean, I'm reluctant to say on camera that I want to do a count back because I'm afraid that it might not quite work out in my favour. But anyway, yeah, just back to the Riley Dobson thing. Such a wholesome moment. It was just, yeah, it was fantastic. And I'm glad that the visa sign guy got his due credit and was able to be added into the collage. But, mate, we're going to jump straight into our proposals. Or even nominations, sorry, for this week. And had the wedding theme on my mind, apparently. What's your nomination, mate?
I don't know if I'm about to steal yours, but we will see. So this is the problem. Like you're the host. You can make yourself go first, and then I have no chance of trying to beat you.
You go first. I think I know where you're going, so you go first, mate.
Okay, so there were a variety of things that took place in the most recent A-League fixture between Adelaide United and Macarthur. There's 3 or 4 different things that you could have picked. I'm going to go with the Hindmarsh Cat, who already has its own Twitter account, parodying the FFA Cup Seagull account from back in the day. For those of you that didn't see the highlight, randomly, about 70 minutes into the game, a cat was spotted in the stadium and it ran the length of the pitch. The poor thing looked terrified, so I hope the Hindmarsh Cat is okay and is safe wherever it happens to be and is in a better place. But ran the length of the pitch, tried to jump the advertising hoarding a couple of different times. It was just one of those kind of like peak A-League things. It was a grey cat while the Adelaide were debuting their grey kit. So like there was a whole bunch of different stuff going on. Adelaide at the moment, the brand of football they're playing, the performances they're putting on for that Cooper Stadium crowd, the random animals they're getting appearing on the pitch, like everything's going incredibly well in the City of Churches. So my nomination will be Hindmarsh Cat for this particular week.
I had a feeling that's what you were going to go for, so I had to put myself on mute there when you said, I hope the cat's in a better place. I was like, that's a little bit more.
I meant emotionally. I didn't mean physically. Like, I hope the cat is okay because it looked a bit like frazzled. It looked a bit upset the way it was running across the pitch. I hope the cat is fine and someone's looking after the cat. I don't hope the cat is no longer with us.
No, the sentiment was there. I knew exactly what you meant, but just the wording. And maybe it's me. Maybe I just was being too morbid. But my first thought was like, oh no. Good nomination, I think. I've gone for one. I've said this previously. I'm not a big fan of the recency bias when it comes to the Hall of Fame. I think in particularly with the Hall of Fame, I mean, it needs to be tried and tested. They need to stand the test of time. So the cat might get in because everyone goes, oh, yeah, that was really groovy. But my nomination, I think, when it comes to standing the test of time, this one does. And when you're talking peak A-League, this one fits the bill as well. I'm going back to my old friends, the Central Coast Mariners, mate. But I'm not nominating them. I'm nominating a guy who was at their game once. And it was the guy who pitch invaded at the Mariners Stadium on crutches. I think he's wearing an Australian cricket shirt as well. I just think that is a fantastic moment. Peak A-League, so how does a guy, so he's on crutches and he's got a moon boot, somehow jumps the fence, in itself an incredible achievement, somehow gets past security, I don't know how they didn't see him, gets on the goal, on the pitch, so he stands in front of the goals, and I mean, just an iconic moment. There's some great photos of him battling the security with his crutches. Would have been a difficult one to go for, but I mean, I just think that was just a fantastic moment. And a great piece of skill, evade security, jump over the advertising board, jump the fence, and run onto the pitch in a moon boot and with crutches. Some great photos. That's my nomination. How am I going to sum it up in 3 words? Pitch invader, crutch
pitch invader. So we've both gone. Interestingly, we've both gone with pitch invaders this week. Just one's an animal and one's a different kind of animal. And then you fallen back into the habit of nominating things from Central Coast, thinking that is your winning mentality. You've won the last 2 with a Melbourne City-based proposal, and then prior to that, a Wellington Mexican international fan. So I don't know why you're falling back into this habit of having to nominate things from the Mariners. This is old versus new. This is where we're really going to test out this recency bias. One of the elite all-time peak A-League moments versus one of the most recent best in the league. This whole season is just the best in the league season, or best in the world season, where everybody after every game is saying how fantastic the league is. But this will be, I think, a fascinating contest. Go and check out over on Twitter for the links to this poll vote. As always, you guys will decide who is our next inductee into the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, definitely. And the reason why I went for this was because when I saw the cat pitch invader, it just reminded me of other pitch invaders. So I thought that was what you were going to go for. I thought
you were nailed on to nominate the Mauls Balls kit, which is a very sharp Adelaide United kit, like the 5th or 6th one that they've done. You're the kit guy. I left that one wide open for you.
Well, do you know what? Hot take here. That kit, do not rate it. Not a fan at all.
Crazy.
Nah, I'm just not. I mean, we won't get too bogged down in this. So I love the thought of it, sort of iconic, something that relates to Adelaide. So, I get that, but I look at it, I go, it's just not that good of a kit to me. Like the Mauls Balls, it's sort of they're not visually appealing.
Are you talking about the shirt? Because I think the shirt, short, and socks combo is one of the better kits in the league. Like the total overall kit. This is a whole other discussion that we should be having another week. But the overall kit I thought was excellent because I like that kind of like lighter away kit or clash kit, and then like the red shorts portion to it. It just gives further value.
Sorry.
Yeah, you'd like the red shorts piece?
Yeah. Sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. I am a big fan of the red shorts. The one thing I will say is I do like how they went for the Moles balls on the socks as well.
Yeah.
I thought that was a good touch. But I just look at them like the balls themselves, they're not that visually appealing. So I think where the story behind, for me, the story behind the kit is far better than the finished product. Like I look at it and I go like, oh, that's average.
I look at it.
The story behind it and the tie-in, I get behind.
Yeah, so I don't really care about the Moles balls thing. I think it's good that they're trying to do something unique or specific to Adelaide. If I look at those kits behind you on the wall, none of them's got like a landmark or anything associated with it relating to that city or that club or whatever else other than the logo for the team that happens to be there. That's why I'm a big rap for it. Like, go and do dumb shit like that. Go and put the Balti Bridge on Western United kit. Oh, sorry, the Westgate Bridge on Western United's kit somewhere. Go and get like that silhouette MacArthur bullhead. It's stupid as hell, but at least it's something unique to their club and to their kit. And at least I think what Adelaide's doing well is that they are trying to find things that aren't necessarily the prettiest things or the most aesthetic things, but they at least resonate with their local community. And I think they've got a very good recognition of what their fan base wants. And if their fan base wants balls on a kit, they should get balls on a kit. It's not that different to like the Here and Bean Hearts on a kit. If you eventually start embracing it and start getting it out there. I quite liked it, but I'm happy to defer to you. You're the kit expert. So
No, I just think it's one of those things where the thought behind it, and I think you're right, where it's like the Wellington Phoenix, their kit, how it's got the topographic map as part of the stripes. Great touch. I really like that. I like that it's thought out and it has some sort of connection to the city. However, I don't think the end result is a great kit. And I think the Moles Balls one, for me, it's the same. As you said, full credit to Adelaide for thinking outside of the box, full credit to them for doing something attached to the city. As you said, the kits behind me, I think the only one is the Star Casino is in Sydney. That's the closest connection. Or
Hunter Ports are in Newcastle, but it's a sponsor, so I don't even know if that technically counts.
So it's a local sponsor. So I think the thought behind the kit is great, but I don't think the visual is there for me.
Do you like the Wollongong kit?
No.
No, not a big rap for that. These aren't that hot takes. Like they're just contrarian takes, but that's fine. Like I trust your judgment. But go for it.
Very quickly on the Wollongong one. Again, I like the concept. I love that they went for a specific, Wollongong themed kit. I like that they stuck with the topographic feature, that sort of ties in with their home kit as well. Again, the storyline is great, but I look at it, I'm just like, it just doesn't strike me as amazing. I think the storylines and the sentimental meaning behind it are better than the end result. So full credit to them, but I don't look at them and go, geez, I simply have to have that. But that's just me.
Mate, I guarantee if you find one on eBay in 6 months' time that's like $12, you will 100% get it. But that's a story for another day. Anyway, kit talk is over for this week. We will jump back in and see how we go.
Yeah, definitely. It's gone for too long. We got sidetracked. That's why I didn't want to get into it because I'm like, man, you're going to have to pull the plug on me at some stage. But we've got through it eventually. You do the edit. You can go back. You can cut it all out. You go, oh, Brent, I don't know. Your mic turned off. No idea what happened, mate. But, mate, what we're going to talk about now is some of the big talking points from the W League season. In the first half, we had a bit of an in-depth look at each team, the team of the season. We talked about the grand final. But I want to talk now about the league as a whole. So what we've got, mate, is a few headlines, some big talking points from the W League season overall that I think we should discuss and it's worth talking about. Now, have you got slides for these?
I have not got slides for these. We're just going to kind of talk through them as headline moments, and then people can let us know in the comment section below their thoughts, opinions, frustrations, whatever else. Some of this stuff we may have talked about before, but we're going to try and summarize it to go through almost a timeline of the W League itself with some of those key headlines.
Exactly. The only reason I asked it slides, it means that I can go through these orders and I don't have to worry about stitching you up with your button pushing, because I think I went to assists before when we were meant to do clean sheets, or the other way around. Anyway, it doesn't matter. The first headline, this is probably the biggest one and not for the right reasons, was the Fox broadcasting quality at the W League. This was, what adjective? Oof, they're so diabolical, I think is what I'm going to go with.
Shithouse, we can go with that as well. Like, there's a myriad of different things. There's the Hexagon of Doom, the Tuba guy, the cutouts, and it all kind of culminated in the grand final as Angie Beard's like starting out her captain's winning speech celebrating winning the W League Grand Final that they cut away to the warm-up of a Western United game that Diamante wasn't even playing in. So who really gave a shit at that point? Like, not only their, like, we talk and criticise quite a bit their overall coverage of football, and clearly football not being a priority for Fox Sports. Their coverage of the W League is like another tier below that again, where they're not showing games live despite having supposedly like a women's sports specific channel over on Foxtel. They're mainly at KO now. Thankfully, these are likely, fingers and toes crossed, the last games that Fox Sports will ever broadcast from a W League perspective. Maybe we can talk a little bit more about that and some of the speculation this week in a moment. But like overall, the broadcast quality's got to be probably the lowest of the low as far as criticisms for the season is concerned. And it's such a tough thing because we can't even really hold Football Australia accountable for it, or the players, or the coaches, or the staff, or anything like that, because this is entirely out of their hands and it's entirely down to one person's lack of patience with football, relating to Murdoch Media and how he wants to run his organisations now. And then again, like just a continued kind of degradation of fan support and really, I think like a lot of hostility that like, honestly, I think if we ever signed a deal with Fox again, people will be very upset and angry. And I think a lot of people would vote like in terms of just not supporting the game anymore. And that's one of the things that we desperately need to improve on. We need more people watching on TV. We need more people who have accessibility to these platforms as well. Most people now are on Netflix and Disney Plus and whatever else paying for their demand services. Free to air would be great, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's people how people are consuming media. You don't really get a lot out of KO, to be completely transparent. Like, other than football, I'm going to cancel it as soon as the A-League's done because I just don't care about any of the rest of it. So, like, Fox has clearly not cared about it for a while and has actively been trying to devalue their football product. And the way that they've treated women's football, given that they are receiving $40 million a year from the federal government to broadcast more women's sport, is pretty abhorrent and pretty unprofessional in a lot of areas. And the big frustration that I've got and that a lot of people across Twitter I've seen at least is that it's so unapologetic. They don't really acknowledge any of it. They don't acknowledge the Hexagon of Doom. They don't acknowledge the tuba guy. They didn't acknowledge that they cut out of Angie Bede's speech as she's celebrating a grand final victory. Like, they just don't seem to care at all. So I think for everybody's hope and everybody's sanity next season, so that we're not talking about broadcast quality anymore, it's for the best that we do move on to greener pastures, of which there has been some news during the week, which we can talk about if you want.
Yeah, well, very quickly, I want my 2 cents on the Fox stuff was, I mean, there was some of the other incidents that you didn't mention was, what was it, like the oil painting game where it was like the quality went super weird. There was curses on screens, the audio cutting out multiple times where the feed just dropped and you'd miss goals and stuff like that.
So that was actually in that premiership decider, that final game of the season between Sydney FC and Melbourne Victory, and we missed Princess Apini's goal live because it cut out and we didn't see her take her penalty. We did see it on replay, but yeah, like there's two. It's weird that like I can talk about 5 or 6 different things and still forget 2 or 3 of the biggest moments. Such was the regularity with these issues coming up.
Definitely. And like, I mean, the one thing that I will say is like, I understand that there would be difficulties, in particularly at some of these W League venues, because they do go to, you know, smaller grounds that, you know, that might not have the best setups technically to facilitate that kind of stuff. You know, you can understand that a little bit, but that in no way excuses some of the stuff that we saw. Even just having like, you know, 1 camera setups, no replays, nothing behind the goal. It just reeked of lack of care and investment and effort, and as you said, just sort of devalued. And I thought it was really, really quite disappointing. You know, if you can forgive someone for making mistakes if they're trying, if the effort's there, you know, like if these mistakes aren't necessarily a result of lack of investment or lack of resources, and you can go, okay, you know. Well, what was it, like the Tim Cahill goal in the World Cup, right? We almost missed that because they were showing a replay of the goal previous, you know, and no one was expecting that. So if that had happened, you go, well, look, fair enough. But in this instance, it's by no means excusable as well. So hopefully we see a dramatic shift. As you said, some of the news coming out this week was that apparently 9 News and Stan were close to inking a deal with the A-League. I think it was for roughly 37 or maybe 32. I think it was 37 and 32 is what Fox revised the deal down. I might have got those numbers mixed up. I think it was Michael Caine who first put the tweet out that apparently it was done. It has sort of been walked back from there. A few other soccer journalists and football writers sort of saying that it's not quite there at that stage, that it is still open to bidding. But what were your initial thoughts on that? Because Stan, I'm not sure if you remember, or I'm sure other people might remember as well. They came out early and said that if they were to get the A-League and the W-League, they'd want to keep it in summer. So what are your thoughts on the deal, and would you like it, or have you got some reservations?
Look, I think anything at the moment will be an improvement. And let me clarify this first, because this is going to come up again with something else that we're going to talk about. Speculation being reported in fact on Twitter drives me absolutely nuts. There's another story relating to the Central Coast Mariners, which we might talk about if we've got time, where we started a day where they were going to get bought by Manchester United, and we finished the day with a story saying they were going to get bought by a US conglomerate and move to the Gold Coast. So all of this different speculation being reported as fact and then retweeted by everybody with their additional comments and whatever else, momentum gets in the way of it. And I totally understand and get why so many fans are so keen to hear this announcement, because they don't want to have to think about a future where potentially Fox by default gets it again. We have also heard from James Johnson saying that he's going to do separate bidding for the A-League and W-League domestic rights and the internationals. If we can find some sort of level where internationals are on free to air all the time and the A-League and W-League are paid, I'd be okay with that, because the A-League and W-League needs that consistent revenue. The challenge then also comes out, and I thought you might mention it, but the World Games just kind of shut down the website, which makes us all kind of think that SBS is going to start retracting some of their football coverage, or at least their football specific shows, despite already having rights to the 2022 World Cup. So at a time when certain things are moving backwards and certain carriers don't care, I am excited that Stan's kind of coming forward. Not so much the 9 portion of it, to be completely transparent, because I could see the marketing for the A-League becoming like a cricket show, like a cricket platform, where I don't really enjoy their commentary and coverage and all that sort of stuff for cricket or rugby league or whatever else. And I don't love those sports, but I don't think they put together the best package. I think they tend to lean too much into that dinky-die Australian colloquialism sort of broadcasting, where for us, we're spoiled by the fact that we get elite world-class broadcasts from places in Europe where we do see those elite competitions, and we expect that standard, and we need someone that's going to deliver that standard. The Stan part's very exciting, because if you look at how much marketing that they've put into and resources they've put into broadcasting the Australian Rugby Union competition, they really are kind of going all in with that, where they're saying, okay, this is where we're going to provide this platform. They've got additional shows each week, things we used to get with Fox, like Sunday Shootout, midweek reviews, stuff like Santo, Sam and Ed, all that sort of stuff that we got in previous years that we haven't had now for the last 5-6 seasons. Stan have been doing that for Australian Rugby Union. So I'm excited that they'll be looking to broadcast the games themselves, and then at the same time hopefully have some sort of supporting or ancillary additional content each week that allows us to discuss the key topics for the league. Because the league is fantastic, and the fans and the fan engagement is still ridiculously good somehow despite all this stuff. So really we just need more platforms and more content, and I think hopefully Stan look like they are relatively invested in getting as much of that content created as possible.
And just very quickly, chiming in on a couple of things there, 9 own stands.
Yeah.
So I think that's why the two get paired together. I don't think that necessarily means that 9 would broadcast those games on free to air, but it does at least enable that option down the track, stuff like grand finals or title deciders on Wednesday nights, stuff like that being on free to air. And as you touched on with the rugby union, I'll be honest, I've only watched one rugby union this game, which might be more than most other people, but from what I've heard and what I've read, Sten are actually doing a very good job with the rugby union. A lot of the community there seem to be quite happy. Again, if you're an avid A-League and also rugby union follower, and I've got that take wrong, let us know in the comments below. But from what I've read, that it seems to be doing a pretty good job. So, I mean, the big takeaway was keeping the league in summer. For me, I'm not opposed to that, to be honest. I like that it lines up with the European seasons. I think that's good. It means as a football fan, you don't get burned out. You're not just following football all year round. The fact that you can watch, in particularly now, A-League games, and, they finish at 9 o'clock and that leads straight into the Premier League, I think that's fantastic. So that's just my opinion. We are talking about the W League. We've got a little bit sidetracked there, but the next thing that main headline or discussion point that I want to talk to you about, mate, is the season length. So what do you think of that? I think at the moment for this season, 12 games, not enough. I think you can give it a little bit of a pass mark given the whole COVID situation, when they had to start it. all these uncertainties about how many games they'd be able to fit in, about border closures and everything like that. If it was an isolated issue, you could probably forgive it. I think we've seen, though, based on previous seasons as well, that it isn't fully isolated. I'm hoping that it's something that changes next season. What do you think the ideal season length is? And are you willing to give the FA a pass mark due to COVID on the season length? Sorry,
no, because it wasn't an FA thing; it was a Fox Sports thing. Remember, we had to kick off by January 1st to fulfill the Fox Sports quota and obligation. It had to be a mid-season thing. So it probably actually segues nicely from the last point where you were mentioning the summer season and Stan's preference. We should note as well, like I think Vince Rigari tweeted immediately after or later that day that his sources had said the complete opposite, where like a bunch of different parties were still investing and they were still like, going through tender opportunities.
Yeah, it's an open bidding process, yeah.
But the portion I will say is if we do stay with summer competition, you get a certain security that we are going to get primary billing on Stan because they're not really broadcasting any other sports during that period. And then at the same time, one of the big criticisms for the W League specifically is that if they move the W League competition to winter, they will cannibalise the NPLW competitions in each state. And I think a lot of different players, teams, whatever else, who are trying to keep it as being like a full-time professional job, if they've got W League income during the summer season and then NPLW income during the winter season, albeit supplemented with like a likely additional work, they can actually have like a full-time playing career, if that makes sense. Whereas if you try and put them at the same time, effectively, a lot of those players that are W League level, but maybe not quite European and WA or North American level, won't be able to supplement the entirety of their income for a 12-month period. So there's a little bit of stuff that kind of goes both in favour and against that. But the trade-off is you start then losing the ability to have conversations around a national second division and aligning our grassroots game, which is during winter, all the way through to our elite tier, which is during the summer months. And I think that, I don't know what the bigger priority will be. Time will only tell with that one as to what Football Australia views as being the key element. Is the key element that we get an alignment from grassroots to an elite level, which we absolutely 100% need? Or is it better to take a short-term, like 5-year decision to say we are going to commit to this summer competition to try and build the best version of the W League heading into the World Cup? We 100% need to get to an 18-game season at a minimum, like within this season. Like the next year, we need to be doing that where everybody's going to play everywhere twice. I have seen different articles linking it potentially a jump to 12 or 13 teams to try and get one-to-one representation for the A-League clubs and the W League clubs, plus Canberra in that as well. Or, fingers and toes crossed, we leverage the W League to get Canberra and A-League side and get a 13th team in the competition, and then Tasmania or whoever else. Your fantastic tweet about the Tassie Red Devils, more on that to come. But like, I think you desperately have to get to a full home and away season where you play once away and once at home. That is what all football elite competitions do around the world. We need to get to that standard in the W League at a minimum, and then we also need to replicate that for the A League as well. We don't need to be playing everybody 3 times. We need to get more teams into the competition and in turn play like a 24-game home and away season with 13 clubs, or 26-game home and away season with 14 clubs, or whatever else. So yeah, I desperately think that is. There were signs at the W League Grand Final. Chrissy Tedesco had one. Shout out to our little Macedonian fireball. And Michelle Morris did a fantastic job as the capo for the Sydney FC support. Both of those playing groups, or both those fan groups, had signs saying extend the season. So it's clearly something the fans want. It's clearly something the players and coaching staff want. And it's something that really we need to look at as being a legacy item for the 2023 World Cup, to say, yes, we made the jump to a full-time W League competition, not a 12-week sports carnival type aspect, which is the way it kind of operates at the moment.
Yeah, and I think one of the big things for extending the season as well is just so we can, be taken seriously when we compare ourselves to other leagues. For a while, a few years ago, the A-League was one of the premier women's football competitions, but we've really seen in Europe that some of these leagues, in particularly in England and France, are really, really stepping up. A lot of these major footballing countries are really investing more into their women's football leagues, which is fantastic to see. But, for the A-League to still be taken seriously and then have a 12-game season when you're comparing it to some of these huge countries and huge football associations and leagues in Europe and in North America, it just sort of makes us look I don't know what the right adjective is, but almost semi-professional, So we want to keep up that reputation of being, a proper league for attracting players, attracting back players and things like that. So I think that's a big thing. As you mentioned, with cannibalizing the WNPL, that's a huge risk. I mean, when Will and I were doing our NPLW preview last week, we were talking about Arpia Leichhardt in Sydney and how they have a bunch of W League players coming down into that squad, including Princess Abini. Kayla Morris from the Victory, she came straight out of FC Bulleen Lions. Geez, that was a mouthful. In the NPL here in Victoria as well. So you don't want to lose that. And then briefly on summer versus winter, I mean, it's so hard. I don't know which option you favour, the standaloneness or having the two leagues incorporated together, because ideally you need both. So I'm not too sure how you get around that. I don't know what the answer is. I don't think anyone does.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's what makes it so hard, because you need both, really.
But both have risks and both have rewards, but it's like weighing up what is the key and critical item, what is the most important thing to us moving into the future. And I think securing, I think the way it's going to play out, my gut feeling, and it's just a feeling, this isn't analysis or anything, I think they will be looking to get security for the next 5 years, and that they're happy to do summer for at least a few more years to try and get us that security and get us to that base where maybe if Stan are happy after that 5-year period, they'll help facilitate a jump to winter football. But you can't do one without the other. I think the higher priority right now is securing a broadcast partner that's going to allow us to, kind of flourish in any environment and get back to the great seasons of the A-League and what the A-League used to be in terms of its viewership and fan support and all that sort of stuff. That's really what we need to be aspiring towards, not necessarily like a national second division's like got a lot of different layers to that particular onion that we have to work through. And if we can, by way of staying in summer, get more W League teams, get more W League games, then I think it 100% serves additional leverage to making that decision as well.
Yeah, one very, very, very quick note before we move on to the next point of discussion. National second division, we haven't even got the first division right. That's not even firing on all cylinders. Definitely agree that there needs to be one eventually, but we've got to get our house in order before we start expanding. My next talking point or season headline, and there's a lot of things to unpack with this as well. You mentioned expanding the league. We mentioned, expanding the season. You mentioned adding expansion teams. I've got sort of a dual headline here. The first part, that I wanted to talk about is in-season player departures, because we mentioned that before when we were talking about Adelaide United, and we mentioned it as well when we were talking about Brisbane. How big of a problem is this for the W League? Is it an issue that they need to address? Because I think it is. I don't know, again, the way to solve it is, you're always going to get players who get opportunities for bigger clubs overseas, and we never want to hold players back. But do you think it's an issue, in particularly for Brisbane, who lost 2-star players right on the eve of the finals? Because that pretty much made their entire season more or less a write-off. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think you kind of summarised it quite succinctly there, where you don't want to be that club that kind of resents and holds back players from going. I know we said we're not going to talk about A-League examples, but it's a good one. It's a good parallel to make, where Aaron Moy was originally bid on by a club from the UAE or Saudi Arabia or somewhere like that, and Melbourne City turned it down with a view that he'd leave at the end of the season, and he eventually went to England, which, hindsight being 2020, was the right career move, I think, for him. But in the W League, I don't know if they get the same resource allocation where they can make decisions like that, where they can turn down the finances. Both Claire Polkinghorne and Emily Gielnik at Brisbane, they were like transfer fee deals because they had multiple years on their contracts. So Brisbane actually got quite a bit of income that arguably will have supplemented their W League season this year and into the future as well. So maybe they didn't have as much of a wiggle room relating to funding where they could make that decision. At the same time, their season kicked off the last weekend of December. If we were in a scenario where that season had started in September, we could still have a longer season and still get the season finished before the European League start. And I think that's where it kind of comes into it as well. Those bids came in from Scandinavian nations for both the Brisbane players that we've mentioned and for Dylan Holmes from Adelaide, where if the season was kind of already in its final stages, potentially they hang around for another week or two to see out their season commitment and then make the move over. So potentially an earlier start date, like a September kind of timeframe for the W League, to allow a full season of 18 games to be played and a final series of the top 4 or whatever else you want to do. And then it still gives you additional time for a couple of weeks a break, really, effectively, for any players that make that jump to Europe to go and join their preseason programs, to go and be there for the start of the season. So I think there's a couple of different ways that you could look at that. One, an earlier start date for the season and a longer season. And then also at the same time, making sure that prior to the European leagues actually starting, you've got a plan in place to try and get your final series sorted, so that on the cusp of the finals, you're not losing players like Dylan Holmes, like Claire Polkinghorne, like Emily Gelnick. And I already kind of mentioned, like, I don't think that Brisbane Roar side makes the finals without those players, but I don't know if we necessarily can retroactively punish Brisbane for that, because they were given an opportunity where they could receive money and income that they desperately needed, and at the same time allow those players who are elite, who are world class, and who probably, to be transparent, are looking to be in Europe, to be closer to Tony Gustafsson, to get into Matilda squads, to make sure that their place is secure for the World Cup. So yeah, it's a tough one at the moment. I can definitely see why people and teams are jumping to Europe. We haven't seen that many players make the jump to North America recently. And I think that's starting to also signify a shift in the way players are leaving the W League, where they're not necessarily looking to go from W League to North America. They're happy to supplement those two sides of their 12-month period, their playing year. They are looking, though, to make jumps to permanent teams in Europe if those bids come in for them. So, yeah, it's a tough act to balance, but I do kind of think both clubs in this scenario got it right. I'm hopeful that the Australian professional leagues will bring the season forward and extend it so that we don't have to have this issue in this conversation in the next 12 months.
Yeah, it's really tough, and to be fair, I don't think Brisbane necessarily made the wrong decision. As you mentioned, they got transfer fees for both those players who left, but it's just it's so painful. Like, they played the last regular season game. It's like they couldn't have held on to them for like 2 weeks, 2 more weeks, just the finals. So like to get so close and then to lose them, I think is a killer, and that's the pain. So again, I don't know I don't think there's an easy solution or a one move solution to fix it. I think part of it is growing the professionalism and making it a more competitive league, getting these clubs, making them more financially secure, so they don't have to not necessarily turn down that money, but they can afford to delay it perhaps. But I thought that was a bit of an issue as well. Hopefully that's something that we don't see going into next season, because for Brisbane, I mean, when they lose those two players and then they crash out of the final 6-2, you look at the season as a whole and you go, geez, well, that was a bit of a waste. We had this superstar team, lost one game in the regular season, finished second, okay, unlucky. Playoffs, we lose our best two, not our best two, but two main players, and we lose. It's like, well, not a waste of a year, but it kind of was, when you look at it as a whole. The next thing that this sort of ties into as well was you mentioned expanding the league. But one discussion point I have for us is, do you think the league's too top heavy? Because I think it is. When you look at Sydney, you look at Brisbane, we'll include Melbourne City, despite having, a terrible season this year. They have been at the top in terms of quality of players as well. And then you look at some of these teams below them, so Adelaide United, who have never made the finals, the huge gulf that Perth Glory seem to have to the teams above them, and even the Newcastle Jets. Is the league too top heavy, and how would it facilitate expansion? And and one other thing is, how can we avoid that gulf becoming even wider?
I think, look, I don't think the gulf is too heavy, because I think if you look at that league table in a 12-game season, there was 6 points separating first and fifth. So that's like over half the competition.
But then there was 9 points between fifth and sixth.
Well, the next point I was going to go to is then you add Melbourne City having a bad year in that, and you've probably got like a top 6 sides out of the 9 that are at an elite level. And forgive me, fans of these clubs, because I'm not trying to deliberately kind of shit on you, but if you look at Western Sydney and their recruitment and the way I'm not including Melbourne City in this conversation. I think they had a terrible year, but they've done the right things relating to like infrastructure and development and all that sort of stuff.
And just quickly, sorry, on Melbourne, even their recruitment, they were able to recruit former Matildas, Japanese internationals. That was still on point. They just couldn't get it on the park.
Yeah, so the portion that I would kind of come back with is that Western Sydney are clearly trying to develop an academy structure for the W League. And because of the shortness of that season, I don't know if long-term their vision, and this is what they need to clarify, because some of their W League players will go and play for like Illawarra or Apia that you mentioned, or Manly or whoever else. They don't stay around in that same core group. I think if they can start building towards having WNPL representation in New South Wales at an elite level so that they can get like year-round football for that group, and they've got like the core that they work with for 12 months that represent them at a WNPL level and then also at a W League level, and then they've got like 2 or 3 internationals that they bring back in to try and round out a bit more quality to that squad. I think that's what they need to work towards, because they're kind of halfway between both at the moment, where they've got the W League side of it and the facilities sorted, but they don't have that 12-month academy structure that we see for a lot of the young players at an A-League side, where players under 23 will go and play in local NPL competition during the off-season, so that they're still getting that 12-year-round development with their club as a full-time player, trying to learn and develop. I think that's where Western Sydney's kind of getting it wrong at the moment. Perth facilities are terrible, and they're not investing more money in that, and so is Newcastle. So you take that top 6, if you include City in that discussion, of the ones really trying to approach elite level facilities and trying to approach the game from a full-time perspective during the months of the season. And I don't think that's that bad. Then I think you take Western Sydney, who are trying to do something different to the rest of the divisions, and then you've got the 2 that really financially are struggling the most, Newcastle and Perth, and I don't think that gap is actually that big, if that makes sense, if you look at the relevant situations relating to those clubs. The big challenge is Wellington Phoenix got turned down to join the division like a week before they were due to announce it publicly, and they already had players signed, to some of which ended up at Melbourne Victory. How different could their season have been had they not had those players? How different could it have been if we had a Wollongong Phoenix side playing in the W League this year, and their contributions and their competitiveness? Would it have dragged down the rest of the competition? Would it have added another team to that kind of like bottom group that we're looking at now? Or would it have made it more competitive for those final 4 spaces? I don't really know. And I think teams can change so rapidly at the moment with off-season and international recruitment. About the core of Brisbane side got ripped out within a 3-week period because Katrina Gorry, fantastic news for her, but like fell pregnant and has left during the season. They've lost 2 of their bigger players. They're probably maybe at some point going to see Tamika Yallop try a handover in Europe again, or in North America again. So like very quickly you can take squads like that in a matter of weeks and have them completely ravage their players. You can have teams like Melbourne City where their entire starting 11 gets taken away and they've got like 3 players from a previous championship winning season, such as the victims of their own success. So I don't think the gap is too big. I think where we need to grow and where we need to develop and where we need to talk about legacy items is everybody needs to be aspiring towards those full-time training facilities and those full academy structures. And that's really the teams at the bottom of the division. They're not going to get anything out of this league for the likes of Newcastle, Western Sydney and Perth if they're not making those infrastructure adjustments and they're not committing the same resourcing and funding that they do to the A-League squads that they do to the W League. The challenge is that's not always economically sustainable.
Yeah, well, that sort of ties in nicely to our next talking point, mate. What do you make of the future of the league? Where do you see it going? And also, from a playing point of view, what do you see about the next generation?
Yeah, I think one of the positives, if you wanted to focus on that for the league, is that by having a lot of the world-class Matildas now playing in Europe and opening up so many spots for stars to step up, pretty much every squad, as we could run through it, has young talent that is very exciting for the future. Like even Perth's got Hannah Lowry, who's like 16, 17 and already playing at like a W League level. Western Sydney, we spoke about their academy trying to bring people through. Newcastle have got young players. Melbourne City have got young players that they're trying to develop. I thought Leah Davidson was excellent this season as a teenage player, arguably one of the best for City throughout the course of the year. And that's even without getting into the top 4 sides who all have talented players around 19, 20, 21 years of age. Both Melbourne Victory and Sydney FC have very young cores. Kira Cooney-Cross, Remy Simpson, players like that are stars in the league despite their relatively young ages. So I think the next generation, the future is there. And I think one of the things that we talk about when we talk about the A-League for a national second division is getting more playing time. Potentially it's a blessing in disguise that having our elite players with that European pathway now provides additional spots locally for the best NPL talent to be testing themselves at a W League level. And even with that, we saw a whole lot of younger players playing this season, but arguably a similar quality and style of play throughout the course of the league. It didn't feel like the overall depth, the overall quality of the division got any worse. The coaching is still at a high standard. Those consistent players that do remain from previous seasons know what it takes to win that league and to compete at that level. And now it's about transitioning that information to the next generation of talent. So incredibly exciting. I look forward to, again, next season, seeing how those 17, 18, 19-year-old players that got their first opportunities this year continue to develop and really seeing which of those young players turn into the next stars and the next Matildas and the bolters for 2023.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I think the big thing that we can agree on, and I think it's a good note to end on as we do pretty much come to the end of this week's episode, is there are still very exciting times ahead for the W League and for the A League, but specifically the W League as well. We saw a fantastic season this year. Hopefully we get something, even if it's half as good as it was this year, then I think we'll be happy with that. But there's definitely lots of room to grow, definitely lots of exciting times ahead. And hopefully we can see the league take a step forward, take that next step forward in the right direction, mate. But Sean, I mean, that pretty much brings us to the end. We've had plenty to talk about. Thank you very much for joining me on this week's episode, mate.
Thanks for having me, mate. Always love talking football with you, and I'm sure we'll do it all again next week.
Yeah, absolutely. We had lots of talking points this week. We got sidetracked on a couple, but I think we got through it in the end, and it was fantastic, mate. If people want to check out more of your stuff, where can they find you?
Yeah, links in the description below, but really on all the reserve team video content, weekend recap, the podcast. We've got a couple more shows coming now that the W League season is finished, relating to the A League and relating to Australian New Zealand football. And we've got, we didn't even talk about it, international football's back. The Matildas just played. Oh, of course. The Socceroos are coming up. There's an Olympics coming up. We've got a whole bunch of great content coming on the channel, so very much looking forward to bringing that to everybody as well.
I can't believe we forgot about the Matildas. That's all right. They weren't exactly positive results, so we can gloss over that and we can analyse and discuss those later on. But that does bring us to an end of this week's episode of the Reserve Team Podcast. My name is Branson Gibson. If you want to find me on Twitter, @Branson Gibson, you can see my handle below my photo just there. But please, as well, guys, remember to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. It does make a difference. We are across a wide variety of social media platforms, Sean. We've got Twitch, we've got Facebook, we've got Instagram, Twitter, everything. Check out the reserveteam.com.au. We cover all things Australian and New Zealand football, from international stuff, W League, A League, grassroots. Sorry, I almost said Matildas again. Kick culture, it's all there. It really is the home of all things Australian and New Zealand football. Please like and subscribe. It does make a difference. But everyone, thank you once again for listening to the Reserve Team Podcast.